News Channel 5 network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Barris here, and on Wednesday, we've got a good show on tap for you. We're going to open up the phone lines, invite you to join in the conversation as we learn about medical malpractice. Not only learn about it, but asking you at home whether or not you think there's been a time, perhaps you've been wronged by a doctor or a hospital, and you think, wait a second, this result, all right, yeah, doctors aren't miracle workers. They can't always cure you, but did you have something where you just suspect, you have a feeling that maybe everything wasn't done properly? That's what can lead to a medical malpractice lawsuit. But there's a lot of things you have to take into account when you go that direction, including when did it happen? Because if you sit on it and wait more than a year, there's something called a statute of limitations, and that will leave you out in the cold. Anyway, we're going to get into all that. Take some of your phone calls if you think you're in a situation like that at 737-7587 with malpractice attorney extraordinaire here in the Middle Tennessee area, one of only a handful that are properly certified in this field in the entire state and nationally recognized. Clint Kelly.
Morning.
Am I wrong? No, I'm not wrong. He's humble. As I was saying that, he chuckled to himself, and it is true. You are. You're certified in the state.
I am board certified.
What I'm saying about this is when people seek an attorney for something like this, a lot of attorneys might say they'd be willing to take on a malpractice case. What makes you different from perhaps a general practitioner?
Well, it's the same as physicians who become board certified. You take classes. You have to handle a certain amount of cases that go to jury trial. You then have to pass a verbal or oral part of the exam to convince the people who are board certified that you are an expert and can specialize in that field of medical malpractice law. And once you complete that, then you can become board certified.
All right, and the point is, these are the only cases you'll take. Do you do divorces?
No.
Do you do criminal law?
No.
You do malpractice.
Correct.
In your opinion, have you seen malpractice cases, which I know you take to civil court, that could be criminal? I'm just wondering. I mean, some of them that were so bad that maybe, in your opinion, you thought this was criminal negligence.
I can think of a couple off the top of my head, which was so bad it could have been called manslaughter.
Interesting. Well, I mean, that's why it's a very, very serious thing. The statute of limitations thing I always like to throw out at the beginning of the show because we've had calls. Remind folks how that is, and it's the way it's set up in the law in Tennessee, right?
Correct. It's 1 year from the date that you discover that you've been injured. You have to file your claim within that year or else your case is barred. So, like we always say, Nick, if you suspect that you have been the victim of medical malpractice or a family member has been a victim of medical malpractice, pick up the phone and call immediately. The call is free. The worst cases are the ones I see, Nick, where someone waited too long thinking they were going to get better or trying to make the decision whether or not to bring the claim, and then I have to tell them, I'm sorry, but you can't go to court. That's
the toughest. You know, when we sit down before the show, I like to talk to them about some of the things happening in the news. So often what gets people's attention when it comes to malpractice cases are high-profile ones involving famous people. We talked about Joan Rivers, Bill Paxton, remember? And that's I'm not sure how that resolved. I don't know if you recall that. And you were mentioning the John Ritter case. A lot of you maybe remember the actor John Ritter, who I loved. He was best known for Three's Company. And he died of, was it an
they call it AAA or abdominal aortic aneurysm. Correct.
Okay, that was years ago, and this is still going through the courts?
No. It's been over quite some period of time. I brought it up with you because it's one of those serious situations when you go to the hospital and you have severe abdominal pain. There are a number of different things that can account for that. One of the life-threatening reasons for that is an abdominal aortic aneurysm, and he was misdiagnosed when he came to the emergency room. They sent him home with a diagnosis, I believe it was indigestion. His aneurysm, if you imagine aneurysm, it's just like a weak spot in the aorta that becomes like a balloon. It opens up and it begins to drip. It exploded in the evening hours. They brought him back to the ER. By that time, he had bled so much they couldn't save him, and he died on the operating table. And the claim was that the emergency room had failed to diagnose this, and it came down to CT scans, imaging that was done of his aorta. And I believe it was either CT or MRI, one or the other, that was misread.
So other doctors in court, I imagine, looked at the CT and said, well, there it is. So what were you looking at, right?
Right. Well, the first time when they looked at it, they didn't believe that it was reflective of an aneurysm, but it turns out it was a poor quality scan. And upon reflection, after they had an opportunity to have experts look at it, expert radiologists looked at it, said, there it is. It was there to be seen and should have been detected. And so the issue came to whether or not the person who actually administered the scan had done it properly.
Right. You know, it makes me wonder, in this case, the proper test was done, but maybe the quality was bad. I've been to the doctor before, and I've had friends tell me they go to the doctor for maybe some condition, and the doctor orders up a ton of tests. Okay, and you're like, guys, why do I have to pay for all these tests? And I wonder, I understand sometimes, especially when they think they maybe know what it is already, but are they doing that to cover their butts sometimes just because they say, well, I did all these tests? And they even order more than maybe they ordinarily would, but they're just fearful that if they don't and they miss something obscure, they could get sued?
Yeah, people call it, doctors have called it defensive medicine, which is ordering more tests than they think they should. I've always had the philosophy, I want to have someone practice defensive medicine on me, because the more defense there is, the more defense there is against.
But you pay for it.
Correct. I mean, it's why you have insurance.
You're right, Clint. I mean, that's interesting, because I was about to say, so you want someone to practice defensive medicine. That's a great point.
In John Ritter's case, though, the test was required.
Yeah, right.
The standard of care required it, and the question wasn't whether or not someone had ordered the wrong test. It was the quality of the test that was done, which leads me to as a general principle, I have more cases against hospital workers, people who carry out their duties inefficiently or negligently, as opposed to the doctors. Because in Ritter's case, it wasn't that the doctor done anything wrong necessarily, it was that the radiology tech had done a poor job in performing the scan on John Ritter. And good grief, you'd think that would be the one time you do a scan properly.
That's right. You've got someone like that. It's just scary. In a lot of cases, then, you're dealing with several players, and if any one of those players with some of these serious conditions messes up, is that part of the task for you when you handle any of these cases?
Yes.
I know you didn't do the Ritter case, determining who it was that was the weak link in the chain?
Correct. Or you might want to look at it like the food chain, the doctor's at the top of it, and there are people at the bottom of it who perform the routine functions of, administering tests, making sure that medications are administered properly, that sort of thing. And a lot of times it's those people at the bottom of the chain who make the mistake, and then those mistakes aren't communicated to the doctor. And the doctor can only go on what they call them physician extenders.
Sure.
They can only go on what they're told, or more importantly, what they're not told. So a lot of my cases are against hospitals simply because the doctor did not know or was misinformed about the patient's condition.
If there's nothing like an x-ray to look at for evidence of this, how do you figure it out? What do? You start interviewing everyone that was there when you're handling a case like that? And I know you've told me in the past, sometimes your best witnesses or best sources for info are nurses.
Oh yeah. Yeah, okay. They are.
Yeah.
But it's a fairly simple.
How do you figure it out?
Yeah, it's a fairly simple situation. Like in John Ritter's case, what you do is you'd order the medical records, but you would also order the scans.
Okay.
And because you know what the diagnosis is, so you're doing an investigation, kind of reverse engineering the situation, perform an investigation, say, why did this happen? And could it have been prevented, and should it have been prevented? And part of that task is having those scans reviewed by an expert who looks at those scans and says, aha, there it is. It was there for anyone to see. And the key question is not whether or not knowing what happened, that's how they found it, but rather if they looked at this case and not known what killed John Ritter, could they still see an aneurysm on there and say, you know what,
I see.
This should have been, in Ritter's case, captured correctly on the scan.
Gotcha. And the key phrase that he used a moment ago is standard of care.
Yeah.
Every medical condition, except things that are terminal, could potentially be, stopped or helped, I suppose, if you knew exactly what it is, but some are very difficult to diagnose. So standard of care is, you can miss things if you do the standard of care, but you're looking at what the standard is and whether they followed what most doctors accept as being the route you should go, right? That's what standard of care is.
Standard of care, they're rules.
Yeah,
all of us have rules that we have to follow. You have rules in your journalistic profession. Sure. I've got rules as a lawyer. Doctors have basic rules they have to follow when certain conditions are presented. And if they violate those rules, then they can be held accountable for whatever injuries are caused by that violation. There are times when the doctors follow the rules and still have a bad outcome. You and I discussed that quite a bit. In fact, there are a lot of cases where patients call me and they think they have a case, and it turns out they don't because it was a bad outcome. There's no guarantee someone's going to recover. There's no guarantee you'll have a good result. The cases that are meritorious are the ones where I discover the doctor failed to comply with the standard of care or violated the rules, and that led to an injury which should have been prevented.
Absolutely. And you know what? And I'll say this as we go to the break, and Clinton will elaborate when we return. There are some unexplained deaths, I will say, that are clear red flags for certain conditions that we'll get into with you about how. In fact, there's one locally I was going to ask if maybe you've been obtained as representation for this family, because I have to wonder about this. There was a firefighter, I think, and we talked about it, who had, I think, some type of basic surgery and ended up dying, you know, and he was young, and I'm like, it's kind of like the Bill Paxton thing. I'm like, something wasn't right here. Now, I don't know what the circumstances are on this family and what they think, but it raised questions. We'll get into what those red flag ones are. If you're on hold, stay there. The number is 737-7587. You have a question for Clint. This is free legal advice, which is pretty cool. Right. We'll be back with your calls and more of our conversation with malpractice attorney Clint Kelly right after this.